Welcome back to Black and Published, a podcast for writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. I'm your host, Nikisha Elise Williams, an award-winning author, two-time Emmy Award-winning news producer, publisher, all that good stuff. Today, we're talking with TaRessa Stovall, author of Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. TaRessa Stovall was born a jazz baby in Seattle, Washington, when much of the country was racially segregated and her parents' marriage was illegal in 16 states. An author from the age of 7, TaRessa has written several poems, books, and plays on various topics, including racial identity and the impact of colorism on people of color. Her books include A Love Supreme, Real-Life Stories of Black Love, the novel The Hot Spot, and a children's book entitled The Buffalo Soldiers. TaRessa is an award-winning journalist whose works have been featured in USA Weekend, The Courier Post, the Montclair Times in New Jersey, The Defenders Online, and several other platforms. An official superfan of the OWN television series Queen Sugar, TaRessa is the proud mother of a son and daughter. She lives in Atlanta and likes to stir things up on social media. In our conversation, we discuss the legacy of passing, going from indie to mainstream, and then back to indie and publishing, how a comment from President Obama helped influence her to write her memoir, and that one time the legendary Ruby Dee called her up on the house phone. Black and Published family, let's get into this conversation. All right, so TaRessa, thank you so much for joining me today on Black and Published. I always like to start the interview with this first question, and it is, when did you know that you were a writer?
Thank you so much for having me, Nikisha. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I first knew I was a writer at 7 years old. So what happened was I'm from Seattle, Washington, and it was autumn, probably September, October. And my mother, brother, and I were on our back porch. And while my mother was busy finding her keys and opening the door, I saw this huge, almost pulsating orange moon. And I said, Mom, look at that moon. And she glanced at it and said, oh, yes, honey, that's a harvest moon. And I literally stood there at 7 years old on the back porch and improvised a poem about the harvest moon. It winked at me, a wink that only I could see. It shines so bright, it shines so clear that I could never doubt or fear. It shined throughout the night. That was my first poem, Harvest Moon. I don't even know where it came from, what inspired me. I mean, like most writers, I was an avid reader as a child, an early reader. I started about 4 years old and an avid reader, but I'd never even thought about writing. And she looked at me and said, that's pretty good. Let's hurry up and go write it down. So that was really, and then after that, I just kind of felt what I call the inner click of intuition, maybe, or guidance from the other side. And at that point, I started referring to myself as a writer. And so when I was a little girl, when people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, well, I am a writer.
Wow. So 7, you're writing poems and declaring out loud that you were a writer. So did that stick with you as you grew up and went to college and all of that?
Absolutely. It stuck with me. I really have to credit my mother. Even her first, spontaneous response to me just, reciting a poem on the back porch one night when she was busy trying to hustle us in the house. She was supportive. She was encouraging. As I got older, she would proofread my work. She was a great proofreader. She would offer her opinion on my work, but she always took me seriously. In fact, she told me that I had to learn to type. This was on a manual typewriter because I'm old. I had to learn to take shorthand. All these things she would say, well, if you're going to be a writer, you're going to need to know to do these things. She also, however, made sure I knew that I would probably need to have a quote unquote day job. I was making my fortune as a scribe. So, I would say that early parental support and taking me seriously is a huge deal. And I want to share one other story that was really meaningful. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I had many favorite writers and authors, and one of them was the legendary Gwendolyn Brooks. African-American writer, author, poet from Chicago. And I don't remember the specifics, but she came to Seattle and I went to go see her. Mom took me to go see her. And I had typed up, because by then I could type, all my little poems and put them in a binder. And I gave them to her. And I asked her if she could please read them and give me her thoughts. She was my idol, so I'm sure I stuttered and was sweating and everything. And God bless Gwendolyn Brooks. She did, whether she actually read it or not. She very graciously smiled and she said lovely things and she took my work. And then later on through the mail, she sent me a lovely letter of encouragement. I wish I still had that letter.
That is an awesome story.
Right. And so, I mean, that is just on top of my mother's ongoing support. She, like I said, she was at the top of my list of literary idols as a young girl. And so for her to give me that warm reception, that positive affirmation, that welcoming embrace, basically you couldn't tell me anything after that.
Yeah, if mama says it's okay,
I was
can tell you wrong.
I was concerned. Right?
So what then did you do for your day job while you were making your career as a writer?
So day job. So my mother was what was then called a secretary, what now would be called an administrative assistant. And, for someone, she was born in the 1920s, grew up in the Depression. So for someone in her generation, that was a big deal. And she was also divorced and a single parent of 2 biracial kids. So she was a pioneer in a lot of different ways, very independent, very strong. And so she was, again, but from a working class background, Jewish from a working class background. And so, and just, again, parents who grew up in the Depression, you were like, the greatest thing you could aspire to was a steady job with benefits. Like that was the ultimate, okay, for us baby boomers, that for most, for at least working class. And nobody on either side of my family had been to college. I was considered smart, tagged gifted early on, but nobody ever said a word about college to me. Like it just wasn't even a conversation ever, even when I did really well in school. So what my mother was like, you have to learn to type, you have to know how to take shorthand. In her mind, a smart thing for me to do, since we weren't really considering college or anything, was that I too could become a secretary or what's now an administrative assistant or get a nice steady office job and then do my writing on the side. What I did that. I also hated it with a passion and was lucky enough, a whole story about in the early 1970s, how colleges and universities were starting what's now known as affirmative action to recruit at-risk students of color into their beautiful campuses. And thanks to a wonderful African-American community activist in Seattle, Larry Gossett, he literally tricked me into going to college. It's a whole story. It's outlined in my memoir. And so I ended up at the University of Washington, and I went to college to learn how to make movies. So I was a film TV major, and I went to 2 years to the University of Washington and 2 years to a lesser known school, but a very special place called the Evergreen State College. And I was at the Tacoma campus, and I'm really honored to say I'm currently an author in residence there. But that was is a really great college because it is experiential, non-traditional. They don't emphasize grades and tests. It's much more like a graduate school where the students have a say in what they want to learn, and it's experiential learning. And so I was able to transfer to that. And what I ended up doing job-wise was really public relations, public relations marketing, because I could write. I understood communications. I understood different kinds of media. And I was interested in multimedia fluency in the 1970s when it wasn't cute or trendy, and I lost jobs because of it. I had offers like at TV stations and newspapers, but they said, well, do you want to be print or broadcast? And I said, I want to do it all. And literally they said to me, that's not possible. You have to decide. And I said, well, I'm not going to decide. So I was able to do well in my career because I was somewhat unusual in that I was fluent at the time. This is the olden days before the internet. I was fluent in print. I was fluent in television. I was fluent in radio, all those different mediums. Very few people were, and certainly very few women of color were at that time. Now, of course, you have to be all that and more.
Wow. So from, I guess, executive administrative assistant, college for film school, PR, marketing, executive. When did the writing of the first book come in? Because you were doing a lot.
That's true. That is very true. Thank you. Thank you, Nikisha. Toni Morrison, when she was an editor and I think a single mother of I think two sons, she said something a long time ago that branded itself on my brain and that I could completely relate to, which is that you write around the edges of your life or your day. Like you get up early or you go to bed, stay up late, or you know. I remember Terry McMillan famously writing one of her first books while she was working also an office job on what was then a word processor. And when she would, and I did this too, you know, you do your work real fast, and then you'd have the machine to kind of surreptitiously try to work on your own stuff, right? All those little things. The very first book was a book of my poetry. I was about 19, 20-ish. And I just gathered up some of my poems and self-published them and got 500 copies printed and sold them throughout the city. People knew me or wanted to be supportive. So that was very encouraging. Then it was, probably about, I don't know, several years later. And I co-wrote a book on homeopathic medicine, which is a natural form of healthcare that really changed my life. And it wasn't really designed for a mass audience. And I co-wrote it with a friend of my mother's who had also had life-changing experiences with homeopathic medicine. So that was my first book called Catching Good Health, just explaining homeopathic medicine to people who didn't have medical backgrounds and the history of it and how it could help them. And then it was a few more years till my next book, which was a contract book on the Buffalo Soldiers, a children's, I would say, middle school book. So I still hadn't done anything with just my name on it that I could really say, hey, I wrote a book. The first major book to be published, I co-wrote with my then husband, Calvin Stovall, and it was the first major book. It was published by Time Warner in the year 2000. And it was a gathering of stories of Black married couples. So it's titled A Love Supreme, Real Life Stories of Black Love. We're really blessed because if you look really closely, Ruby Dee did the foreword for us.
Yes, legendary Ruby
Dee did the
Dee.
foreword. And the story behind that was at the time, of course, if you want to talk about Black love and marriage, you had to start with and circle back to Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. And through friends, I managed to reach her and request that we interview her for the book. And she was so gracious. She called me on the phone. I remember I was washing the kitchen floor. I had two little kids, like infant and toddler. And she's like, this is Ruby Dee. And of course, I had to not faint. And she apologized and said, well, we can't do an interview because we have our own book coming out about our relationship. So I think it's called Ossie and Ruby in Our Life Together, in This Life Together. And it was coming out soon. She said, but would it be okay if I wrote the foreword? I'm like, okay, you wrote the foreword. Like, I felt like I had just won the Powerball and the Mega Millions that day, right? That was just such an incredible blessing. And of course, a beautiful job. So that was the first major book, right? That was the first major book. And that was thanks to the doors that Terry McMillan had opened in the early 90s with the incredible success of Waiting to Exhale. Many of us who already had writing backgrounds could fairly easily get book deals, fairly easily. It wasn't necessarily a given or a piece of cake. You had to know what you were doing and have an agent and know how to put together an idea, pitch it, and then deliver it. But she really did fling the gates open for many, 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 many Black authors. And for that, we are forever grateful and happy. So that was the first book. And then I went on to I wrote a novel, The Hot Spot. This is a reader's copy, but The Hot Spot, which is just fun. It was basically what you would call chick lit back then. And it was first published in hardcover by BET Books. It was when chick lit, Bridget Jones' Diary, Sex and the City was really just coming up.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get in on the bandwagon with urban chick lit. So I had an amazing opportunity. The phenomenal, one of my favorite authors, Donna Hill, was the editor for this series. And so she she invited me in, and it was just really a hoot. And so that was a great experience. And then I worked with a fellow sister, Tracy Price, a fellow author, I'm sorry, sister friend, Tracy Price Thompson. We did 3 anthologies together. She was having her novels published at the time. We were both kind of impatient and wanted to just do all the cool things you could do, as a new Black author. So we did a short story anthology called Proverbs for the People. And this was really amazing. It was really amazing because I learned how to write fiction working on this with Tracy. And we had 54 authors. Some were New York Times bestselling authors. You could see Pro Clegg, Omar Tyree, Margaret Johnson Hodge, Travis Hunter, all those great folks. Mm-hmm. And some of whom have become close friends. And at the same time, we had Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in there. She was writing under the name Amanda Ngozi Adichie. Hers is the first story because 54 authors listed alphabetically by last name. And we had a high school student who was like 15 and had never written anything that had been published. So it's a great collection of very diverse voices. And the unifying thread was that each story had to be based on a proverb that was either African, African-American, or biblical. So that's why it's called Proverbs for the People. And that was a lot of fun. And somebody just messaged me today that this book is their Bible. And this book came out, many years ago. But it really is a wonderful book. I mean, my story is good. Tracy's story is great. She's an amazing writer. But there's so many stories by names who are now much more well-known, and some who aren't known at all, but the writing is amazing. So this was really, working on this taught me how to write fiction. So it was also a masterclass for me.
I gotta back up because, one, you self-published your poetry at 19. What year was that?
19. I think I was 19. Maybe I was older. It was in the late 70s. So maybe I was in my 20s.
Late 70s.
Early 20s.
I think Nikki Giovanni says that she started self-publishing her own work. So, I mean, it wasn't uncommon to self-publish, but really, I don't think about self-publishing really being in existence then. So it's like funny that you said that you self-published then in the late 70s, and then your first, I guess, major book, A Love Supreme, comes out in 2000 in that wave of Black authors who kind of got on thanks to all the work of Terry McMillan and her novels in the early 90s. So what is your opinion now of the publishing landscape, where those doors that seem to have flung open between like 96 and, I'll be generous and say 06, have kind of been shut?
That's fabulous question. And I've come kind of full circle. So publishing landscape, especially for Black authors and readers, especially for Black authors. So what's interesting yes, I'd self-published. I also self-published back then because it was poetry. And even then, and I grew up, like I literally grew up subscribing to Writer. When I say I took myself seriously, I was a kid and I was like, for my birthday, I want a subscription to Writer's Digest. Like I would read Writer's Digest religiously. I was very focused. But so I kind of had a sense that poetry was not the easiest thing to get published. And also at that time, up until Terry McMillan, this is why we really cannot underestimate, and I'm so glad you're centering her. Up until that Waiting to Exhale deal that knocked us all on our behinds while celebrating it, there were only a few major Black books a year. Like growing up, that we would wait. We would wait for an Alice Walker. We would wait for a Toni Morrison. We would wait for a Maya Angelou. We would wait for that book, a Gwendolyn Brooks, whoever, right? And it would be a while, an Ntozake Shange, it would be a while. Like we'd be hungry and thirsty and starving and parched. And, of course we were going to buy it. Michelle Wallace's groundbreaking books. Of course we were going to buy those books. Of course we were going to just consume them greedily and then process them with everybody we could think of, right? But so that's what happened was, we call the Renaissance in the early 90s, thanks to Terry McMillan. So it was hard to get, just being Black, it was a tough uphill climb just to get a publishing deal. And I think we also have to acknowledge two pioneering legends, literary agents, Black women, Faith Davis and Marie Brown. Okay, they were the grand dames, they were the queen mothers, they were literary agents before the Terry McMillan fueled Renaissance. And they really opened a lot of the doors. And then, of course, Toni Morrison, having been, when she was an editor, she brought in many, many, many Black authors as well. So we can see the need for, but now, even now, the book publishing mainstream industry is not diverse. What's changed, Nikisha, what's beautiful and daunting at the same time is that, like every other form of media, book publishing is in flux and has been changed by the digital world, by the fact that we're now in the digital information age and we're out of the industrial age. And so what's happened with that is that, number one, there are more Black books being published by mainstream publishers, although it's still not anywhere near adequate. And it's still not, as the major publishing houses gobble each other up. So once there were 5 and now there are 4, and who knows in 10 years, right? So those of us who are in mainstream publishing or have been or want to be, you're seeing the field narrow. It's not widening. It's narrowing, right? And so, and even as, Black Lives Matter hashtag and publishing so white and all those kinds of things are happening. A survey came out that only a tiny percentage of the books published in the United States, I believe it is every year, are from authors of color. That's not just even specifically Black. So it's not impossible to get a book deal. It's still an uphill climb. It's still a gamble. And it's harder. It's harder for me. And I've been published traditionally several times, but it's still harder because the field is narrower. They're taking fewer risks and the industry is in flux. So the great news, in a lot of ways, is that the barriers to entry are gone. Just like I can take my iPhone and shoot and edit a movie and throw it up on YouTube or Vimeo, right? Or maybe get an HBO deal. Who knows? But the barriers to entry are gone. The barriers to entry that people like me grew up with are gone. So you can, it's now called independent publishing. And what's gone is the stigma. So it used to be with self-publishing was kind of like, you weren't good enough to get a real deal, so you're just going to throw it out there yourself. It really was a stigma. It doesn't mean the work wasn't as good, but you had that barrier to get over, right? You were perceived as less than. Nowadays, being an independent author is not seen as much different than being an independent musician, visual artist, filmmaker, etc. So much of the stigma is gone. The barriers to entry are gone. The good news is that there are now a bajillion. Anybody who's got any kind of savvy and maybe a few dollars can get a book out. And it doesn't even cost that much to get an ebook out. And ebooks are also huge, right? And distribution into bookstores isn't the same make or break that it used to be, because how many people buy books from bookstores? And that's pre-pandemic. We're not even talking pandemic. Pre-pandemic, people would ask me and I'd say, well, I might go to a bookstore once or twice a year. But, Amazon has ruined all of us. So, you can think about a book and have it ordered in 30 seconds. One click. So everything is changing. So independent publishing, and you have a lot of people like me who've been traditionally published who are trying out independent publishing. So I independently published my latest book, my memoir, Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA, looked into traditional publishing, worked with a literary agent, and she sent it out and we got responses. And what was interesting was, this was about 5 years ago. It took me 5 years to write it. We sent out a proposal, sample chapters, because A, it's nonfiction, B, I'd been published before. And we got some good responses. We got some serious interest. But what some people don't know is that in many cases in traditional publishing, the ultimate decisions for a publishing company to give you a contract are made by the marketing department. And so they were like, we like it, but we don't know what to do with it. And that's because it's not Tragic Mulatto, right? And I knew that the risk was there. I was always prepared to publish it independently. But I thought, well, if somebody's interested, let's see what happens. So, I understood that. A big house came back and said, we can do it if you make it fiction. I said, it's my life story. I'm not making it fiction. How can I promote that? How can I go on a show like this and talk about this book and say, well, I had to publish it as fiction, but really, it just didn't feel right. So it wasn't in line with my values. So independent publishing is amazing in that, like I said, barriers to entry are gone. Anybody can publish a book. Now there's pluses and minuses to that. As a reader, the gatekeepers aren't there. So it can be harder to assume the quality of what I call the rigorous, traditionally published editorial process. They're going to make sure your book looks as good as it can because their name is on it. Their brand is impacted and they're the ones making the money. You might get part of the money if you have a good agent and a good deal, but they're the ones going out on the line there. So they do have a wonderful, rigorous editing, proofreading process that if you're publishing independently and you have to pay people to do that, that gets much more complicated. And the standards aren't consistent necessarily. I don't know what to expect. So, there's pluses and minuses. I know that's a long answer, but so independent publishing now is a viable option for just about anybody. And that's beautiful. There's another really huge, huge challenge. And one of the biggest misperceptions, Nikisha, about being traditionally published is that they will market your book for you. Mm. And this is true a while ago. I mean, this has been true for a while. This isn't new. But most people, when I do book coaching or when I'm just talking to aspiring authors, I'll say, well, what are your goals? I want to be traditionally published. And I'll say, why? There's pros and cons to traditional. There's pros and cons to independent. It just, to me, depends on what kind of book you're writing, what your expectations and goals are for this book. And a lot of people will say, well, because I just want to write and, if they'll market it. I'm like, no, they won't market it. You have to do. There's an exception. If you're a Terry McMillan or a Walter Mosley or somebody like that, or you debut at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, like a lot of these fabulous, brilliant young Black authors who are out now, that's great. But that's like being a really good high school athlete. You got less chances than they do of going pro, of getting published traditionally. Okay. So you could be amazing and not get a publishing deal. And the fact that you get a publishing deal is not a reflection of you or your work. It's a reflection of a narrowing marketplace and just the fact that, so I know you've heard of book proposals. You're familiar with book proposals. So a book proposal is a business and marketing plan for a book. It is not a literary document. They are not assessing your talent. They are assessing, it's like Shark Tank on paper. Think of it like Shark Tank on paper. That's what a book proposal is. They're looking at that at the publishing house. So to gauge your understanding as an author of where your book fits in the marketplace, its marketability, where it fits, and just how much work you're going to do to sell it. That's what a book proposal is about, not the literary merits and your phenomenal writing ability. No. Or what an amazing storyteller you are. It's a business and marketing plan. It is Shark Tank on paper. And so it's a Shark Tank on paper.
I think that, so I was probably one of the ones you would have been talking to because I initially wanted to be traditionally published. Just because I feel like that stigma is still there. And I talked about this on a podcast the other day, but that I think for you, because you had been traditionally published, choosing to go indie is a more viable option. But for those who are Black and are writers who don't have a way to get into that mainstream publishing arm and don't have the experience or an MFA or a fellowship or a workshop behind them, then self-publishing still very much is stigmatized against you. Like, oh, well, you couldn't sell it, so obviously it must not be good. I even had a reviewer write in the review of my debut novel, she was like, we really don't, I don't ever review self-published books because they tend to not be good. And the only reason I'm reviewing this one is because I met the author, she gave it to me, and I read it and I liked it. And so now I'm going to review it. So I still find it to be that uphill battle, and that it's different strokes for different folks. But I mean, and that was part of the reason why I could not be traditionally published. The responses I got were, we don't know how to sell it.
Marketing.
We don't know what to do with it. And only because of my TV background was I able to leverage my friendships with people in television, say, hey, can I come on your show? Hey, can I do this? And I was still working when I wrote my book. I would drive 4 or 5 hours to South or North to go do a 5-minute television interview to promote my book, only because it's not that I wanted that many people to see it in the market on television, but that I could take the clip and put it on social media and make it look like I was doing something. So, I mean, I think that barrier to entry is still there, but to go from Time Warner and A Love Supreme with the forward by the incomparable Ruby Dee to writing Swirl Girl and doing your proposal and then deciding to go indie with Alchemy Media Publishing, what was that experience like?
That's a great question. Can I address what you said before? Because what you just said is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Really brilliant and incredibly important. By the way, I want to read your book. So you're right. And thank you for clarifying and correcting me. Thank you very much. The barriers to entry that exist for independent publishing, and I'm fighting with them right now with Swirl Girl, you're absolutely correct. I think what I meant is there are fewer barriers between you and a reader, because you have social media and other ways to if you know how to reach your reader. You're absolutely correct, and I want to really thank you for that clarification, Nikisha. The barriers to entry to getting reviewed by anybody but a reader on Amazon, or included, sold in a bookstore, even online. And so you're right. There are still barriers to the places where traditionally published books are pretty much the rule. You're absolutely right. And thank you for that clarification. I thank you very much for that. That's really true. That's true, because I'm encountering that right now. So what you do as an independent author, any kind of author with marketing, ironically, even if you get traditionally published, and I'll answer your question, your very good question. Again, if you're responsible for the marketing, what that ultimately means is defining as narrowly as possible. And this is where my decades of marketing experience comes in handy. Defining as narrowly and specifically as possible your reader. The beauty of today's world is, with enough work and attention and networking, which obviously you're very good at, and all of us authors have to get good at, you can then find ways to connect with those readers directly or indirectly, even if you can't get past the gatekeepers. But you hustled, you got past that gatekeeper reviewer. You made that reviewer make an exception, and the quality of your work and of however you approach them made them make an exception. Not everybody's going to be able to do that, you're right. But I love that story, and I'm going to let it inspire me, to try to get one of those mainstream-ish reviews, right?
But I even did that with my most recent novel, Beyond Bourbon Street. It came out last August. And so I've left the television industry, but I still know a lot of people in it. And so a friend of mine had worked at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She was now in DC. And I was like, hey, Tia, who's the book editor or whatever, assignment manager at AJC? She gave me the email and all the folks. I sent them an email, and it basically came back like, hey, we don't do self-published books, but if you have a publisher, they should send it to us, which let me know that, okay, for me as a publisher, I could send the authors under my company, I could send their books to the AJC and write the form letter and say, hey, this is such and such, ready for review, yada, yada, yada. But if I were to do it for myself because I am the author and the publisher, it's a no. And I'm just like, okay, it's a thing, but it's a constant battle. I find I told this story before that, I had someone from the New York Times Review of Books reach out to me because she had seen my book. She had seen a review But then she wanted me to buy an ad in the paper instead of getting it reviewed. And I was just like, so you can come and ask me for $1,400 for like a little bitty ad in the paper, but I can't get to the next step to find the person that can review the book. Like that's the barrier that I'm finding now. So
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. That is profound. That is very, very profound. And that's also ironic. And I love how you broke it down. You could send someone else's book that you publish, but if your name is on, I mean, maybe you need to use an alias or hire a virtual assistant or something, right? But you're right. I mean, we're always looking for ways to break through. And then obviously the quality of your work is such that people are willing to then, right, once they see it. So you're right. Those do still exist. So that's important. But you can more easily reach your readers nowadays because of social media, digital world platforms, et cetera. But you're right that people do need to consider that all of those end up falling into the bucket of marketing your book. Once it's written, and sometimes before it's written, you will be hustling that book. And one thing I tell authors is, the marketing part is interesting. I tell them that the writing of the book, even if it's really hard and unpleasant, right,
is the easiest part.
Is dessert. And you get to eat dessert first. And that's when you're going to have the most fun, unless you are an extrovert, which few of us are, who just loves going out and which few of us do. So I said, that's the fun. I said, the other 90% is marketing that book, selling that book, even if you're traditionally published, even if you got a huge advance, those kinds of things, they still expect you to do the bulk of the work, and you will still have to be hustling. Even if they give you a push, it's going to be a short push, 3 months maybe, right? And that's if you're already a star or they deem you to be a potential star. So, so you're right. So my journey went through, from Time Warner to I worked with Random House, Simon and Schuster, BET and Harlequin with the hotspot. All positive experiences, all really great experiences, and everything else. And so 2 of the more recent books were done with my sister friend, co-editor Tracy Price Thompson, and then 2 other authors. So we had 2 books that were 4 novellas on healing issues of concern to Black women. One was colorism, and the other one was domestic violence. And those were published by Simon and Schuster. And there was a few years in between when they were published. And in that few years, the world changed. Social media became prominent. And the 4 of us, and 3 of the 4 of us were working in or have backgrounds in journalism when the books came out. Okay. And when the first book, Other People's Skin, came out, we were on NPR, we were over here and we were over there. The second one came out a few years later on domestic violence, and we got together to plan our marketing, and we all said, we don't know what we're doing anymore. It was this brand new thing for us called social media. And there was the publisher did what they could, but they too were trying to adapt to this rapidly changing, often mysterious, perplexing, frustrating landscape of how do you get word out about it? What is this social what? You got to have a social media following. What's that? This was the mid 2000s.
And that's another barrier to entry. Like if you don't have at least 10, 20, 100,000 followers on whatever platform is the most popular. I think right now Instagram and Twitter still kind of reign supreme over TikTok, but who knows what it'll look like in 10 years. But if you don't have that follower count, who are you and who are you selling your book to? Because nobody's going to buy it.
You have to hustle. So I want to go back to your other really good question, though, if you don't mind. So I went through to traditional publishing, came to independent publishing, and what it was like was inspiring, terrifying, and I am on a constant learning curve, present tense and future tense. I believe my goal right now, Nikisha, as I plan my future books, is to be a hybrid author. I said I believe my goal. I'm working this out right now, so I'm sharing with you in real time. A hybrid author where some of my books are published independently and some are published traditionally. Now that's still iffy. don't currently have a literary agent. My former literary agent, who brought me up right and was just phenomenal to work with, we kind of organically parted ways about a decade ago. Organically, amicably. It was just a time when I wasn't able to produce. I had family obligations. I couldn't really focus and produce books, and it just wasn't, the vibe wasn't there. But she was amazing. She's brilliant, and she taught me so much. So I don't currently have an agent. I'm deciding whether I should look for an agent now. My 27-year-old daughter is a literary agent and an author, and yes, Mariah Stovall, and many of the literary agents out there are my daughter's age. So, so that's a little daunting, not in a bad way, just like, okay, how do I get a millennial to even pay attention? So I'm exploring this as an entrepreneur. I call myself an authorpreneur, right? Which is what you are.
Same,
right?
yes.
And a publisherpreneur, but I'm exploring it. And as you well know, this is a non-ending learning curve. And I'm a baby boomer, so technology, I'll be learning the rest of my life. I take webinars constantly right now on things so basic as query letters, synopses. I've been doing these things my whole life, but that doesn't mean I can't get better. Okay. And you're right. How do you build a following? How do you have a platform? Things that authors never had to think, what are my platforms going to be? Do I need a podcast? Those kinds of things. Authors just had to write books and be good at it. And it's much harder now. But what it's been like, I have to tell you, it's exciting. Like I said, it's exciting, it's terrifying, it's exhilarating, it's daunting. I think that what you sign up for is not just writing books and hoping that people read them, like them, and read them. It's committing to staying on this roller coaster, because that's what it feels like, right? That is publishing today and probably for a long time to come.
Yes, in all the ways, yes. I had to take a beat because it's always changing, and it will continue to change. And so it's affirming to hear you say that. I mean, you're going through this too, and you've been doing this for a very long time. So let's talk about Swirl Girl and going from, marketing teams at major publishers not being able to sell it unless it was fiction, to choosing Black-owned Alchemy Media Publishing. Why was it important for you to write this memoir, tell your story, and put it out no matter what?
Thank you. So Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. This book was really important for a couple reasons. It's a two or three part question, Nikisha. So thank you for asking. So I wrote my memoir, Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. The long time reason was that for a long time, I wanted, as a mixed race person, to find ways to reach and inspire younger mixed race people with stories, images, messages beyond the tragic. That's been a goal of mine ever since I was a child, teenager. And I didn't necessarily know how I was going to do that. But that's been a burning desire in me for a very long time. Sometimes it got backburnered by other things, by life, or just where I was in my identity journey. But it's always been there, kind of dormant. Then it was activated by President Barack Obama, when in the first news conference, a few days after his historic 2008 election, he was just kind of being relaxed and casual and talking about how he and our fabulous First Lady, Michelle Obama, had promised their then very young daughters that if they won, they could have a dog. And so he was talking, just kind of riffing about a dog. And of course, it was be more politically correct, since they're Democrats, to get a dog from a shelter, but that they couldn't because one of the daughters was allergic. So they had to get a special breed. And then he threw off an off the cuff comment. I just happened to be cleaning the kitchen at the time. It was like 11 o'clock. My kids were teenagers. They were in bed. I was, cleaning up before I went to bed. I was sweeping the kitchen floor. Again, just like with Ruby Dee, kind of something is interesting.
Something about that kitchen.
And he throws off the comment, shelter dogs are much like me. And I was like, oh, I would wait. Yes, I detailed my book. I was not like, I dropped the broom, the dirt scattered, my dog woke up. I was like, you just, what? I gave you money. I voted for you. I put signs in my yard. You just, what, sir? Are you serious right now? Now, I do believe I'm the only person who remembers that and was bothered by it. But because I would talk to my friends, they were like, oh, girl, you tripping, you know. But I was like, wait. But in that moment, Keisha, in that moment, my ancestors descended upon me. I was working on a big project with some friends who put a lot of time and money into it. It was a big career defining thing. And now my ancestors put the brakes on and said, so you're upset about that little remark. What do you plan to do about it? I was like, I really cannot with y'all right now. Right. But needless to say, your ancestors don't really let you off the hook like that any more than your parents would off for a chore that they've assigned you. So what ended up happening, it took a few years. I'm not going to lie. It took a few years. I had to kind of get past some other challenges just in life and child rearing and taking care of my elderly mom and things like that. But I'm recovering from her passing. But that was like not just a seed was planted, but somebody was watering it and weeding the garden at that point. And so that's what happened. And then the timing aligned and my life aligned. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to do this memoir. And the ancestors were like, great, it's about time. And they just literally sat on me. They sat on me. This book, they sat on me until this book was done. Like, so I would be, I had a full-time job at the time, Nikisha. I'd be chilling, watching a little TV, Netflixing, whatever. They would literally be like, excuse me. Right. And I was like, what? I've been working. It's Friday night. They were like, that's really nice. Why are you not at the keyboard? I was like, dang, y'all are rough. They were rough. The selfish reason I wrote it is also because I believe in the power of story, be it fiction or nonfiction, doesn't matter. Proverb, fable, movie. I believe in story, like all of us who create stories. I believe in the power of story to reach people, to touch people, to change and move the world. And so I wrote Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA as a mixed race memoir, Nikisha, sharing my story to invite others, all others in all groups to do the same. I believe, especially as Black people, mixed race people, people of color, whatever category we want to use, it is more essential than ever. And we finally have the means, as we've never had before. I don't care if you write it, paint it, sculpt it, collage it, dance it, spoken word it, I don't care. We all need to get ours because we all know what happens when we don't control our narratives. We all know what happens when we don't control our narratives, right? And so I am just, as you can tell, that's an obsession of mine. So one of the reasons I wrote it and shared it is as an invitation for you and everybody to find a way to share their own stories. I believe that is so essential.
I feel like we're kindred spirits because I often say and like give talks and do stuff my first line is, I believe in the power of story. And it's just, stories can be universal. So I know all about the ancestors sitting on you and looking at you crazy until you get finished with an assignment. So with all of that said, I'm going to read the description of Swirl Girl and you get ready to read from the section. I'm so excited to hear your reading. So, Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA, reveals how a hard-headed mixed-race Black power flower child battles society and sometimes her closest loved ones to forge her identity on her own terms. As the USA undergoes its own racial growing pains from the 1968 riots after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination to the historic 2008 election of the nation's first biracially Black president, TaRessa Stovall challenges popular stereotypes and fights nonstop pressures to contort, disguise, or deny her uncomfortable truths. TaRessa, take it away.
Thank you so much. Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. So, Seattle, Washington, 1969. In ninth grade, I was being bused against my will to integrate schools in Seattle's faraway North End. The white students didn't want us there. I was happy when I made a new friend, a Black girl who lived out there in the North End and didn't ride the bus with the rest of us. She was brown skinned and the kind of cute that would blossom into high cheekbone beauty. Like me, she had a few adolescent pimples and a couple extra pounds. What are you? She asked me. Mixed. Like with what? She talked like the kids in the North End. Black and Jewish. But you can't be Black and Jewish at the same time. Those two things just don't go together. Black people are Christian and go to church. Jewish people are Jewish and go to synagogue, I said with a sigh. Yeah, see what I mean? They don't fit. So you can't be both. I wondered if growing up Black in such a white environment had damaged her brain. Then I thought about it. If none of the Black people she'd seen were Jewish and none of the Jewish people were Black, maybe it was hard for her to imagine one person being both. But I was a living, breathing example that it was possible. I stood to face her. I can be Black and Jewish because that's what I am. I said slowly, okay. You mean like Sammy Davis Jr.? Oh, hell no. Sammy Davis Jr., well, he's different. That's all. But we're both real. If you don't believe me, you can't be my friend. She stared at me for a very long minute, then nodded one time. And we never discussed my identity again. Another excerpt on the school bus. You know why white girls are better than Black girls? One of the boys in the school bus asked loudly. My head snapped up from the book I was reading, and the air tightened around me. A few girls argued, then other boys joined in. White girls are better because they're not as much trouble, and they do what you want with no back talk. Yeah, another boy piped up. They know how to let a man be a man. The circle of boys kept making their claims as the girls accused them of disrespecting their mothers, sisters, grandmas, aunties, and cousins. Just when it looked like fists were about to fly, the bus supervisor walked up on them. Stop this foolishness right now, she demanded. The sparring students glared at each other across the aisle, their argument deflating under her stern gaze. I knew that refrain like the chorus of a hit song. Some of the Black boys in my neighborhood often went out of their way to inform us, Black girls and mixed girls alike, why we weren't as good as white girls, listing the same reasons the boys on the bus had given. I wondered where they learned this, what made them think this way, why they were so quick to put down their own in favor of white girls. This was less than 2 years after Jim Crow laws had been struck down, and it hadn't been that long since Black boys and men were lynched for even being suspected of looking at or speaking to a white woman. I wondered if any of the boys in the bus were trying to mac on the white girls in the school, or maybe they were captivated by the idea of white female flesh as forbidden fruit. Maybe they truly believed the white girls were superior. The whole thing made my head pound. 1970. My copper-toned father's attitude about my identity made me wonder if he regretted having made mixed children. I couldn't tell if he hated his own Blackness or thought I'd be better off pretending that it didn't exist. Though he lived nearby, he stayed on the outskirts of our lives. While Mom did double duty as a parent, he made it clear that he had no interest in playing a fatherly role. On holidays, Dad invited my brother Greg and me over for his delicious barbecue. On regular weekends, when he wasn't on the grill, he listened to good jazz, drank endless beer, drenched his food in hot sauce, and got on my nerves. One Saturday, we sat in his house watching news reports of the race riots blazing across America's inner cities, with cries of Black Power coming from the screen. He stared impassively, nursing a beer. Desperate to forge a sense of connection with him, I gathered my nerve and reached out to share something close to my heart. I read this book by Malcolm X. He set his beer bottle down hard on the wooden coffee table. I don't need to read about that shit. I've lived it. He studied my face as though he'd never seen it before. What's your problem? Why are you trying so hard to be Black? I'm not trying to be anything, I retorted. Why are you trying to deny your Blackness? We locked eyes. Stop telling people you're Black. You can be, he waved his arm around, anything you want. The way you look, you can tell people anything. I don't need to tell people I'm anything when I'm already something, I said. He looked sad. You're too young to understand what you're throwing away. That night, I laid awake asking God why he had to be my father, why the man who gave me my blackness was telling me to throw it away, deny it, because he believed that living a lie was a better option. When he claimed I could be anything, I heard him suggesting he'd be cool with me changing my name, denying my ancestors, lying about every aspect of my being, and pretending he didn't even exist. He acted like blackness was only for those whose bodies didn't give them other options, a stain that I should avoid and escape for as long as I could pull it off. At the dawn of my teen years, as our nation rocked and rolled with shifting race relations, what I wanted most was for Dad to hold up his end of the deal as the parent of mixed kids by standing tall and being proud of his identity, like Mom was proud of hers. It was hard to respect him when he wouldn't even give me that.
Wow.
Wow.
So, do you think that your dad envied your ability to pass, even though you never did?
I do think so. And I learned later, that's very perceptive of you. And remember, this was back in the day, y'all. This was, passing was not unusual. And yes, what I've since learned, so I have an older half sister who's like 18 years older than me, my father's daughter. She's not mixed. And I just learned several years ago from her, I was asking her, she grew up with my dad. So she knows much more about him, his family, the whole history. And she shares that with me. And so one day I asked her about, did she know where his relatives were? Did they have family reunions? And she said, yeah, they have family reunions, And I said, well, have you ever gone? I think maybe she's gone to one or she knew about him. And I said, well, I want to go. And she just looked at me and started laughing. The joke in my family and among some of my friends is, you can take me places, but if I start talking, we're in trouble. Because once I start talking, I'm not quite so ambiguous. So, I grew up with that. My mother would be like, look, this is just 5 minutes, okay? Anyway, so sometimes we just have to slide through without, all the fireworks. So, but I learned that my dad, who was copper toned, he wasn't light skinned, he was beautiful, rich copper, and some of it, but that most of the people in his family passed. And apparently, according to my sister, still do, always have. So when I asked to go to a reunion, she said, I can't take you to a reunion. I said, why? She said, they all pass. So I don't know the details of these people. I think they're in Iowa. He was born in Des Moines, grew up in Minneapolis where my mother was. But apparently meant yes. And so when you look, and he had cousins, and at least one of his cousins could pass, right? And so when you think about, he's growing up in the 1920s and 30s, living in the 40s and 50s, and then, my brother and I come along. But yes, I would say probably envy, but I would also, I'm less judgmental and critical of him now. You pointed out very wisely and perceptively, in the context of the times, most people, there are a lot of people who didn't pass, but there were also different levels of passing. Not everybody was on the 100% imitation of life vibe. Some people passed as a practical measure, but they were clearly Black identified. Their loyalty was to the Black community, but they could get into more spaces, make more money, whatever, get more opportunities. And then they go back to the Black folks and, after work or whatever. But yes, I think that his life was made harder because he wasn't light skinned and he couldn't pass. Absolutely. And I'm, as an adult and someone who's much more cognizant of these things, I'm not as harshly judgmental and critical of him now as I was then.
No, it's completely understandable. My mother's favorite movie is Imitation of Life. And like when you said that, like we were reading that section about your dad, that's what it made me think of that. And just that in that time, And that even if you wanted to be with the Black people and that was where your allegiance lied, it was an easier life if you could pass. And it's understandable why so many people did. The book by Nella Larson, Quicksand and Passing, the two different stories. And one of them, there's the parlor conversation where the husband's joking, hey, if you get any darker, I'm gonna have to wonder about you. And his like pet name for her was Little Nig. And it was like, that's not cute.
Right.
But she was passing, the woman was passing, and so she had to go along with the joke because that was the life that she chose, and then her husband was white. But yeah. So what are the stereotypes that you hate about being biracial? Because you mentioned this in earlier, that this was not, your memoir is not a story of a tragic mulatto, and that it's about breaking the white supremacist narrative. So what are some of the stereotypes that you hate that come with being biracial?
Thank you for asking. The stereotypes that I hate, because they're so limiting and damaging, like all stereotypes, they have roots in truth. Okay? I mean, like all stereotypes, there are roots in truth, right? In this case, and we're talking really about being mostly Black, white, first generation biracial, okay? Because there's lots of different, multiracial is much more expansive and diverse than that. But the tragic mulatto comes out of enslavement, comes out of you're highly identity policed from birth on, because you're either, for a few centuries, you're either a slave or you're not. There isn't like a lovely little middle ground. There's not a meadow you can go off and live in where you're escaping that binary. So the binary is really there. The binary that we know is based on white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And that's the binary that formed and fuels this whole country and still does. So I think that's important for context. So the stereotypes that come out of that and that we're just now starting to be able to address, number one is the tragic mulatto. The tragic mulatto is that I am confused about myself and that I'm rejected by everybody. I'm too white to be Black. I'm too Black to be white. And that there is an inherent tragedy in my existence and in my life. So again, there are people who experience those things to this day and are very eloquent about expressing them. So I don't want to erase that or minimize that. However, what the problem is that we've been limited to the danger of what, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie famously introduced us to, the danger of that single story. We've been limited to that. So everybody assumes, people walk up to me and go, so you're confused? I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm ambiguous looking, so you might be confused, which I can understand, because if I met me, I would be confused about what that person was. But I've always known this is what I am. Da, da, da. So, but the confused, I've never been rejected. Okay. But many people have. Many people who look Blacker than I do have been rejected by Black people. And I think usually it's rejection from Black people, or if we're another mixture, the people of color, that is the hardest. And usually, often, that is the hardest. I mean, I don't know that everybody kind of expects it from white people, but I think many of us just, white people living in whiteness, that's their narrative, right? You're not pure, you can't be there. But so I think that the tragedy that we're all suffering, that we're miserable, and that we're kind of dysfunctional. I think there's a sense that we're kind of socially dysfunctional. Those are the main stereotypes that I would like to challenge. Like I said, even though there are aspects of those that are reality for some people, I think that what's missing for me, Nikisha, is the context that the tragedy, confusion, rejection, pain is all due to anti-Black racism. Ultimately anti-Black racism, and then of course other forms of racism towards other people of color that emanate from that. But I think that I'm always trying to pull back people to that context, because that context, I can't speak for other countries, but that context defines this country and every aspect of life in this country for everybody who's touched by it. And so I believe, like you said, it's a white supremacist narrative. And, we all have internalized white supremacist narrative. Come on. We all have to reach inside and do the weeding, and get the swamp out of there. And we're all impacted by it, which is part of the duality of our consciousness and all of that. But I think that, to just assume that everybody's miserable, the tragedy is you're not white. Again, imitation of life. The tragedy is you're not white. Even if you look like you're white, like I hated like books, movies, the title like The Human Stain, right? But what is it? That's blackness. So the tragedy is that everybody's really talking about is that you're not white. And that's what I want to push back against.
In the excerpt that you read, you talk about the boys on the bus and how they were saying that, they'd rather be with white girls than black girls because black girls don't talk back and all this stuff. And that thinking still persists to this day. I thought it was crazy that they were saying this and you're just now being bused to integrated schools. And now here we are years later, and that's still a thing. I want to ask about, though, you grew up in Seattle, and Washington State has always had some kind of crazy racial stuff always going on. So, like, what was that like for you growing up in Seattle, mixed race, you're living with your mom who is Jewish, and just that environment? What were the politics there of the time?
Great question. You are very good. So Washington State and Seattle have very interesting racial politics, which is one of the reasons I left there in 1986 and have been on the East Coast. Not that any place is perfect, not that any place is less racist or not racist. I'm a big subscriber to Malcolm X's wisdom that when it comes to anti-Black racism, south of Canada is south. And now, as we know, Canada is not exempt either. But so I don't subscribe to any part of the country as, exempt or anything like that. Seattle, 1950s. I didn't know that Seattle had de facto segregation. I didn't know that Seattle had redlining. Okay. I didn't know a lot of these things in an informed kind of way until I started researching for my memoir, because the journalist part of me wanted to provide some context and be factual and accurate. I was like, so like a lot of places in the North, and especially the West Coast of the Pacific Northwest, which is an intersection of the North and the West Coast, you have this kind of faux progressive liberalism, right? White liberalism that presents as not racist, that presents as softer, gentler, kinder, better, smarter, more evolved, and it's not. But growing up, if you don't know that, if nobody's pointing that out to you, you can get blindsided and internalize those micro and macro aggressions because nobody's providing that, if you don't have context. A lot of mixed kids, especially if the non-white parent isn't part of their lives growing up, my father wasn't, or don't have a certain level of political consciousness, aren't given those contextual tools to help analyze and understand and navigate these environments that are so racist. So that's one thing. So Seattle had, on the plus side, and I'm talking 1954, right? 13 years before Loving versus Virginia was legal, but interracial marriage was not illegal in Seattle. There were attempts, Washington State, Seattle, there were attempts to make it so, but they never quite made it through, right? And so a lot of people who wanted to marry interracially went to Seattle. West Coast in general, Seattle specifically. In fact, Quincy Jones writes and talks about this. He grew up partially in Seattle. He was from Chicago, spent his older years growing up in Seattle. And so where I lived was the Central District. The Central District, before it was gentrified, it's not the same now. But the Central District was where Black people and Asian people, and then went southward a bit, could live. Okay, redlining. And the same for interracial families, many interracial families. Okay, so we lived in the Central District. And the good news is that our neighborhood, working class, was very Black with lots of mixed families. That's a good news. So growing up where I grew up, when I grew up, how I grew up in Seattle was really great as a mixed kid. It wasn't so great as a Black woman who's Black identified. So I moved to the East Coast, moved to Atlanta, right? And so the racial politics, like I said, that liberal progressive smile facade, well, we're not, we're better. We're so much, even now oh, that's the South. Oh, that's the South. Oh, that's, And I always push back against Northerners bashing the South. I'm like, look, I chose to live here twice. And, I happen to prefer my racism on the table, Southern fried,
Up front.
Up front, maybe hit me over the head with it. I'm good, because that other stuff is insidious and less healthy. But, people have different preferences. So the racial politics of the time, very colorist. I don't know any more colorist than any other place, different than Atlanta. But any place where there's a lot of people of color, there's colorism. And colorism isn't just perpetrated by the white folks, and we know that. So there, what happens is that the migration patterns, not my family, but the migration patterns of many Black people when I was growing up in Seattle were from Louisiana. So you had Creoles, and you had not all, but some Creoles who were very committed to keeping that melanin minimal in the babies. So I grew up with people like that. I'm not part of that group, but I became familiar with that pretty young. And so I was like, okay, that's alrighty then. That seems to be their thing. In general, it was a generalization, but it was clearly, prevalent. So Seattle's racial politics, what made me leave Seattle, Nikisha, was that, and it isn't completely gone now, I think it's somewhat better, is that many people, not everybody, but many people in the Black community were very conditioned there. There's a conditioning there to negate or backburner Blackness in favor of multi-ethnic, multiculturalism. We're talking from the 60s, 70s on, okay? So I left in 1986, I was an adult. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. I was like, can Black people just do something Black? Like, he wouldn't even want to call things Black all the time. Sometimes, yes. But there was a real tension going on. There was a real back and forth going on about, well, let's do this Black thing. Well, we got to be inclusive. I'm like, nobody else is, every other group of color has something, an institution or something that is Native American, that is Chicano, that is Asian American, that is Pacific Islander, okay, that is specifically that, a cultural institution or something. And so that's something. And so when I have to tell you, when Rachel Dolezal came on the scene, and I heard she was from Washington State, people were like, how could she get away? I said, oh, he's from Washington State. I completely can see how she got away with it. And I think I just had to laugh. I wasn't even upset. I was like, I don't know where else she could have gotten away with it. But Washington State, there's an erasure of visible, tangible, focused Blackness that is very prevalent. It's not, there are exceptions. There are wonderful, wonderful, significant exceptions to that. But that is the atmosphere that you're fighting.
I wanted to ask you about Rachel Dolezal, but I thought that would be like too stereotypical of Washington State, because like
you can ask me about Rachel.
Well, no, you've already answered the question, but I want to know, because you say there's an erasure of Blackness even within the Black community there. So then how do you come out to be this self-proclaimed Black power flower child? That's very specific.
Yeah, it is. Okay, good question. So, and I really credit, especially the older I get, the more I am able to look at it from this perspective, because, I'm an elder and I've written a memoir about it. So I've had to really think about it a lot, ask myself all those questions, my ancestors. But I think that at a formative age, and this is detailed in the memoir, through one of my girlfriends, I was introduced to the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And this was very random. I mean, if you want to look at it on the surface, very random. We were bored one summer, and she was like, let's go hang out with my cousins. I didn't know anything about these cousins. I'd never heard of the Black Panther Party. 1968. And I said, okay, this is back when we just ran the streets, basically. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's go see your cousins, whatever that means. And we go to this, it was a storefront. And I was like, what is this? And she just and we walk in, and it's the fairly newly formed headquarters of the Black Panther Party. It was the first chapter formed outside of the state of California. The young men, Elmer and Aaron Dixon and their brother Michael, who formed it, were in high school. They were very young, just all super brilliant and very well organized. They had medical clinics. They had the breakfast program. They fed hungry families. They did sickle cell testing. They did all kinds of things. I mean, these were kids. I want to emphasize that. But at the time, they just were somewhat older than us. And so they let us hang around because my friend was their cousin, I guess. But you didn't hang around aimlessly. You were put to work. So we were putting food into bags for the hungry families. And we also, and I believe this was a real privilege, we were able to sit in on what they call their political education sessions. And we were really, I put it in my book, they talked to us and listened to us and treated us like adults. They gave us books to read, like the Red Book by Mao Zedong and, things like that. And we had to read them and come back and discuss them with some intelligence. And so I tell people I was politically raised by the Black Panther Party of Seattle and the Dixon brothers at a formative age. Like, in my mind, this was better than school. And why couldn't school be like this? That's when I became very disenchanted with school, because I'd experienced something that worked better for me. Like, this is relevant. This is helping me understand this world that I'm navigating, and it was giving me political context, international context, activism. You didn't have to just be frustrated or angry or crying in your bedroom or cursing under your breath. You could build a fully functioning medical clinic while you were a teenager. You could feed hundreds of hungry families. Things like that, which at the time didn't seem the least bit remarkable. They didn't seem at all remarkable. And I think there's magic and power in the fact that they didn't seem remarkable. In my mind, that's just what you did. You talked to young people and you engaged them like they were intelligent and conscious, and you shared information and you listened to them, and so you respected them. I also write in the book that these were some of the first young men I was around who weren't predatory in terms of a young girl's budding body. That was something else you were trying to navigate, right? At school and at home and in the community. And that really, really, really was a big deal for me. And that really struck out. And so I just was in her hero worship mode, but I still kind of am for them because they're really outstanding individuals. So the Black Panther Party at the same time, the hippie movement, left coast, boomer, come on. So my high school friends kind of would joke and say, you're this Black Power flower child. And I did, we used to so picture me in my bell-bottom jeans and my army coat and all my long wild hair. And we used to draw with magic markers on our jeans. I know that hasn't stopped. And on one leg, I'd do a peace sign. On the other end, I'd write Black Power in those bubbly 1960s letters, right? So that's where they were like, oh, you're this Black Power flower child. But that really is a great description of me to this day.
That is awesome. I'm going to leave that there. I want to do a quick speed round before we go to the last question, because we've been talking forever and the conversation is amazing. So for the speed round, what is your favorite book?
Right now, A Born a Crime by Trevor Noah.
Who is your favorite author?
One?
As many as you like.
Author, Ntozake Shange.
What is your favorite movie?
Color Purple.
And what is your favorite song?
Sparkling in the Sand by Tower of Power.
You say that you are a jazz baby. So Miles Davis, John Coltrane, or Charlie Parker?
Coltrane.
And as a self-proclaimed Queen Sugar superfan, which is getting ready to come back, who is your favorite character?
Oh my God. A favorite character? Aunt Vi?
Do you watch the show Mixed-ish?
No.
Really? That was my last question. I just knew that you were going to say, yeah.
Can I explain real quick? Can I explain in 60 seconds?
Go ahead.
I am really glad that Mixed-ish is out there and that it exists. I don't watch it because I've been frustrated with, and this has nothing to do with Kenya Barris, Tracy Ellis Ross, or the show or shows, Blackish and Mixed-ish. I love Blackish. I love Grownish. I'm looking forward to Oldish, by the way. But Mixed-ish is frustrating, and there's a reason, because I was never happy with Rainbow's character. I didn't feel like she was, my kind of militant mixed woman, like, when the mother-in-law, Jennifer Lewis, would kind of insult her. I was like, you got to stand up to her. So this is me, though, wanting her to be more like me. So it's very subjective. I understand it. So Mixed-ish really goes around Rainbow. And when I tried to watch it, and I'm being subjective here and owning my biases and my annoyances, I was annoyed by the Black mother of these mixed children who, and I know this is a sitcom and I know it's Kenya Barris. I'm not looking for a documentary here, but it seemed to me like the Black mother, the Black mother, the white father, and then of course the Black mother's sister who brings the Blackness in, that the Black mother herself did not seem to know anything about how to do her kids' hair. She's a beautiful dark-skinned woman who didn't seem to be tuned into colorism. She didn't really seem to understand Blackness. She came off as very kumbaya and needed the sister-in-law. And again, this is a sitcom, so I'm not, but I just was like, okay, I get it. This has value for some people, but it's going to get on my nerves. But the beauty of this, just want to say, Nikisha, real quick, is everybody needs representation. And I think that it's a mistake to think that everybody Black is going to like every Black product out there. Everybody Asian is going to like every Asian product. Everybody Latinx is going to like every Latinx product. I think we need to learn to support them, champion them, say, yay, they're here, not really my cup of tea. Or, like I like to do, use it to motivate me to write my version.
Well, then, I look forward to your version for whenever that comes out. TV, film, book, I'm here for it.
Thank you.
So my last question, you've done a lot. I mean, you've written a lot. You've been writing since you were 7. You've been publishing forever. It's a lot of words on ink, on paper. When you're dead and gone, what would you like someone to write about your legacy?
That is a great question. When I'm dead and gone, what I would like someone to write about my legacy is that my work opened minds, opened eyes, and maybe opened hearts and ultimately doors for us to understand each other and different kinds of people in a way that helps us to create a more equitable and just society.
That's beautiful. Thank you, TaRessa, for being here on Black and Published today.
Nikisha, you are so incredibly awesome. Oh my gosh, I am overwhelmed. This is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of your listeners, viewers. Just an incredible pleasure and honor to be here. And can I just say that you are one of the best interviewers I know of. And I'm going to be shouting you out to lots of people, if that's okay.
That's fine. I'm going to stop the recording because now I'm getting embarrassed, but thank you. Big thank you to TaRessa Stovall for being here on Black and Published today. Make sure you check out TaRessa's book, Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA. And if you're not following her on the socials, follow her at TaRessa Talks on Twitter and Instagram, and TaRessa Stovall Author on Facebook. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, which I know you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button on your podcast platform of choice. And while you're there, please leave us a rating, a review. Let us know who you want to hear on the show. Just give us your thoughts. You can also follow Black and Published at Black and Published on Instagram and Twitter at BLK and Published. And to keep up with me, head to newrights.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Nikisha_Elise. That's our show for the week. I'll holler at y'all next time. Peace.